Welcome back to Reddit's for Sleep. Tonight's stories are all about kindness, joy, and those unexpected moments that restore our faith in people. Let these heartwarming tales gently ease your mind. Story 1. I let my elderly neighbor use my Wi-Fi and ended up reuniting her with her childhood pen pal. So this all started a few months ago when I moved into a new apartment complex. I'm a grad student studying psychology, living off coffee and instant noodles, that kind of life. And I was lucky to find a quiet little unit on the 3rd floor. The building itself is nothing fancy, kind of old creaky wooden floors and a perpetually flickering hallway light that no one seems bothered enough to fix. But it's quiet, affordable, and honestly, it has charm. My next door neighbor is this sweet elderly woman named Mrs. Ellington. She's probably in her late 70s or early 80s, but she's got that elegant silver hair in a bun look you see in black and white movies. The kind of person who wears a brooch to take out the trash. We'd exchange polite greetings in the hallway. She always smiled warmly, and her perfume smelled like lavender and old books. One rainy afternoon, I was trying to reset my internet router because it kept disconnecting during my Zoom class. I stepped out into the hallway to check the cable box. I had no idea what I was doing, really, and that's when I heard a soft voice behind me. "Excuse me, dear," she said, holding what looked like an old Samsung tablet. "Do you know anything about Wi-Fi?" I turned around and smiled. "A little. What's up?" She explained that she was trying to send an email, but her tablet wouldn't connect anymore. I asked if she had Wi-Fi set up in her apartment, and she said she didn't. She had no idea how. And besides, she was on a tight budget and only used the internet for the occasional email or photo from her niece. Naturally, I offered to let her use mine. I gave her the password, wrote it down in big letters, and even walked her through how to connect. I didn't think much of it at the time, just a small, neighborly thing. But then, about a week later, I saw her again. This time, knocking gently at my door. She had her tablet in one hand and a tin of cookies in the other. "These are for you," she said, handing them to me. "Shortbread, my mother's recipe. I just wanted to thank you for helping me with the internet. It means more than you know." We got to talking. She told me her first name, Estelle. And we ended up sitting in the hallway for almost an hour, chatting like old friends. She told me about her late husband, how they met during a ballroom dancing class in the 60s, and how she used to be a school librarian. I told her about my thesis, which ironically is about intergenerational loneliness and technology. She laughed at that. "I suppose I'm your perfect case study then." The next time she knocked, it was to ask if I could help her search for someone. Now, here's where it got interesting. Estelle said that when she was 10 years old, she had a pen pal from France named Juliette. They'd written letters back and forth for over a decade. She showed me some. Yellowed paper, careful cursive, little pressed flowers inside. Eventually, life happened. Estelle got married, moved across the country, and the letters stopped. She hadn't heard from Juliette in almost 50 years. "But I've always wondered," she said softly. "Is she still alive? Did she get married? Did she keep my letters?" So, using my laptop, we started searching. It took weeks. We had very little to go on. Just a first and last name, a few old addresses, and some city names. Sometimes we'd spend whole afternoons trying to decipher French municipal websites or squinting at scanned school records. Estelle would bring tea, and I'd bring my laptop. It became our little routine. Eventually, we hit a breakthrough. We found a small article from a local newsletter in Normandy celebrating the retirement of a woman named Juliette Lemoyne, a school teacher. The timeline fit. The city fit. The photo, even blurred, looked like an older version of the girl from the black and white pen pal photo Estelle kept in her diary. We found a contact email for the school. I typed out a message, translated it as best I could with Google Translate, and explained who we were. 3 days later, we got a reply. It was from Juliet's daughter. She wrote that her mother was indeed Juliette Lemoyne, and yes, she had a box full of Estelle's letters, carefully tied with ribbon and kept in a cedar chest all these years. Juliette had often talked about her American friend and had wondered if she was still out there, somewhere. They set up a video call. Now, remember, Estelle had never done a video call in her life. I set everything up on my laptop, brought it to her apartment, and sat beside her as the screen flickered on. And then there she was, Juliette, wrinkled and gray, but still smiling that same mischievous smile from the photo. They both started crying. It was a lot of gentle, "Oh, mon Dieu," and "Estelle, you haven't changed," and laughter and stories. They talked for over an hour, catching up on half a century of life. After the call, Estelle sat in silence for a bit, smiling to herself. "I never thought I'd see her again," she said. "And it's all because of you." I shrugged it off, but honestly, it was one of the most meaningful afternoons of my life. Since then, they've been emailing regularly. Estelle's even trying to learn a bit of French again, and she's teaching me how to bake her mother's shortbread. Every once in a while, she brings me a new tin, still warm, always wrapped with a little handwritten thank you note. So yeah, all I did was give my neighbor Wi-Fi access. And somehow, I ended up witnessing the revival of a 70-year-old friendship. Funny how small things ripple out like that. Story 2. My little brother secretly sent my resume to his favorite local bakery. Let me start by saying this. I wasn't in a great place. Not terrible, not spiraling, just floating. I'd been laid off about 3 months before this story begins. I was working a corporate admin job. Nothing glamorous, just spreadsheets, emails, and pretending to look busy whenever someone walked by. The kind of job where your biggest daily thrill is finding an excuse to leave early. So when the company announced budget cuts, I knew I was on the chopping block. And sure enough, I got the email on a Wednesday morning. "We regret to inform you," you know the one. At first, I treated the layoff like a vacation. Slept in, watched too many shows, reorganized the spice rack, reorganized it again. But after a few weeks, the weight started creeping in. The sense of uselessness, the unspoken pressure to figure things out, the looks from friends who didn't say it out loud but clearly wanted to ask. So, what now? I moved back in with my family temporarily, just until I got back on my feet. My mom welcomed me with open arms and casseroles. My little brother Lucas was 12 at the time, bright-eyed, obsessed with cartoons and peanut butter sandwiches. He didn't fully understand what was going on, but he could tell I wasn't quite me. He'd knock on my door sometimes just to say hi, or leave little drawings on my desk. One was of a stick figure wearing a cape labeled "My Big Brother." I still keep that one tucked inside my journal. I spent most of my days scrolling job boards, rewriting my resume, applying to roles I didn't want, and getting ghosted anyway. It was draining. I didn't feel inspired, just stuck. One morning, after another sleepless night of wondering what I was doing with my life, my mom called me into the kitchen. She had this amused look on her face. "There's a call for you," she said, holding out the cordless phone like it was some kind of relic from the past. "A bakery? A bakery?" I blinked. I didn't apply to any bakeries. She shrugged. "They said they got your resume?" I hesitated, then took the call. On the other end was a woman named Natalie, who introduced herself as the owner of Sugarfinch Bakery, a little shop just 10 minutes away. "I wanted to thank you for your application," she said cheerfully. It was, well, let's say unique. We don't usually get resumes with superhero doodles and a quote from SpongeBob, but it made our whole team smile. I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" She paused. "Wait, you are Daniel, right?" "Yeah, but I didn't..." That's when it clicked. Lucas. I opened the folder where I kept my resume files, and sure enough, there was a new version I hadn't seen before. He had taken my template and added his own edits. In the skills section, he'd written, "My big brother is really good at listening, making grilled cheese, and not giving up, even when he's sad. He is the best brother in the world." At the bottom, in bold letters, he'd added, "Please hire him so he can smile more again." I was mortified and touched and kind of speechless. Natalie must have heard the silence on the line because she chuckled. We figured it was a long shot, but honestly, we're hiring part-time help for the front counter and thought it might be worth a conversation. I didn't know what to say, but something in me, maybe the part that had been quietly breaking, softened. I agreed to come in the next day. The bakery was small, but warm and bright, the kind of place that smelled like cinnamon and kindness. Handwritten chalkboard menus, local art on the walls, a bell on the door that jingled like a memory. I met Natalie and the rest of the staff. They were a mix of personalities, some quirky, some quiet, all incredibly human. Natalie asked me a few gentle questions, more like a conversation than an interview. We ended up talking about cartoons for 15 minutes because she mentioned Lucas's SpongeBob quote. Before I left, she said, "You've got heart. That matters more than a perfect resume." I started the next week. At first, I was just running the register, restocking shelves, taking orders. But slowly, I began to feel lighter. Customers would smile when I remembered their names. Kids would light up when I handed them a cookie sample. One elderly man came in every Sunday to buy a single lemon tart and tell a new joke. I started looking forward to those jokes. The team became like a second family. We'd trade baked goods for takeout on Fridays and play music during cleanup. Sometimes Natalie would let me test new coffee syrups, and I'd write little chalkboard messages of the day, like, "Reminder, you are exactly where you're supposed to be, even if it's standing in line for banana bread." As the weeks passed, I began sleeping better, smiling more, even waking up early just to watch the morning light spill across the bakery counter. One afternoon, Lucas came by with my mom to pick up pastries. I was behind the counter, wearing an apron and a flour-dusted smile. He grinned at me, wide and proud, and whispered to my mom, loud enough for me to hear, "Of course. Told you he'd be awesome at this." I leaned over and handed him a cookie shaped like a lightning bolt. "Thanks for sending my resume, little man," I said. He puffed up like a tiny peacock. "Next time I'll add glitter." Honestly, I wouldn't mind. So, yeah, I didn't get the job I thought I wanted, but I got the one I didn't know I needed. All because a 12-year-old believed in me when I'd forgotten how. Sometimes it takes someone small to remind you that you're still big in all the ways that count. Story 3. I offered a stranger my umbrella. 3 weeks later, he brought my lost dog home. It was one of those gray, almost poetic afternoons in late March. The kind of day where the sky looks like it's been smudged with charcoal, and the rain doesn't fall hard. It just sort of exists, like mist that forgot how to lift. I was walking home from the post office. Hoodie pulled tight, backpack slung over one shoulder, and trying to avoid the deeper puddles. At the crosswalk near my neighborhood, I saw a man standing with his back to the street, drenched. No umbrella, no hat, just a soaked hoodie, hands in his pockets, head slightly bowed like he was carrying something heavier than the rain. We made eye contact for a moment. He gave me a tired smile, just a lift of the corner of his mouth, and looked away again. The light turned green, and I stepped off the curb. I passed him, but then hesitated. Something about his posture stayed with me. Not desperate, just quiet, lonely. I only had about 5 blocks left to walk, and I was already wet. So I turned back, held out my umbrella, and said, "Here, take it." He looked surprised. "You serious?" "Yeah," I said. "I've got a hood." He stared at me for a second, then slowly reached out and took the umbrella. "Thank you," he said, voice low. "Really? It's just an umbrella," I replied with a shrug. But he shook his head. "No, it's more than that today." I smiled and kept walking, never asked his name, didn't expect to see him again. It was just a moment, the kind you forget an hour later. Or so I thought. 3 weeks later, I was having the worst Friday of the year. My dog, Bixby, my 8-year-old rescue mutt and best friend in the world, had gone missing the day before. He's skittish around loud noises, and someone had set off fireworks early for some celebration I wasn't aware of. He bolted out of the backyard when the gate latch didn't fully click. I'd spent the last 36 hours stapling flyers to telephone poles, calling local shelters, and pacing the block, calling his name, until my voice went hoarse. I hadn't slept. I had left his dog bed outside with a bowl of food, hoping the scent would draw him back. Nothing. People were kind. A few neighbors joined the search. I got a couple of false alarms from people who saw a dog that looked like him. But nothing stuck. By Friday evening, the rain was back, heavier this time. Cold, persistent. I was sitting on the front steps with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, watching the street like it owed me something. And then, around dusk, I saw a silhouette coming up the sidewalk. It was a man in a dark rain jacket, and next to him, muddy, limping slightly, tail wagging like crazy, was Bixby. I ran down the steps, barefoot, slipping slightly on the wet pavement. Bixby barked and practically threw himself into my arms. I hugged him so tightly he yelped in surprise. I looked up at the man. It took me a second, but then I recognized him. Same tired eyes, though now a little warmer. "You," I said. "You're the guy from the corner, with the umbrella." He nodded. "I've been seeing your flyers. Saw this guy under a bush near the bus stop today. Took me a while to get close, but he let me leash him with my belt." He held up what used to be a leather belt, now chewed slightly on the end. Figured he belonged to someone who'd miss him. I didn't know what to say. My voice cracked when I tried. "Thank you," I finally whispered. "Thank you so much." He smiled, and for the first time it was full, not a tired half smile, but something that reached his eyes. "I guess it was my turn," he said, "that umbrella day. I was walking home from my dad's funeral. That hit me like a soft blow to the chest. I didn't respond right away. I just stood there in the rain with Bixby pressed against my leg and the world spinning a little slower. We talked for a while. I invited him inside to dry off. Made us both tea. He introduced himself. His name was Marcus. Worked part-time at a hardware store. Lived 3 blocks away. Had no siblings. Took care of his dad during his last years and hadn't really talked to many people since he passed. We sat on the floor while Bixby dozed on a towel between us. "I thought about that umbrella a lot," Marcus said. "It reminded me that people still notice each other." "I thought it was just a small thing," I replied. He shook his head. "Sometimes the small things are what keep us from falling apart." Since that night, Marcus has become a kind of quiet fixture in my life. We're not best friends in the Hollywood sense, no dramatic bonding montages or emotional speeches, but we text sometimes. He stops by now and then. Once a week, we take Bixby on a walk together. He always brings treats. And on really rainy days, I lend him an umbrella again. But now, he always gives it back. So, if you ever wonder whether a small kindness matters, whether handing someone an umbrella is enough, just know it might come back to you in muddy paw prints and a second chance at connection. Or maybe even better. Story 4. My grandfather secretly repaired broken toys from the neighborhood and left them on porches at night. I didn't find out about my grandfather's secret until after he passed away. But when I did, it was the kind of discovery that doesn't just change how you see a person. It makes you feel like you were quietly loved in ways you never fully noticed. My grandfather, James, was one of those old school, gentle soul types. He wore flannel year-round, even in the summer, and drank his coffee black, no matter how many times my grandmother teased him for it. He was soft-spoken, moved slowly, and had the kind of hands that always seemed to smell faintly of cedar and motor oil. He lived in a cozy, creaky old house at the end of our neighborhood with a garden full of tomatoes and a garage that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the 70s. But he loved that garage. It was his sanctuary. As kids, we weren't really allowed in there unless he was supervising, which meant we only ever caught glimpses of wooden shelves, jars full of screws, and a battered red toolbox that seemed to hold every tool in the universe. To me, Grandpa was a constant, steady, predictable in the best way. He taught me how to ride a bike, fixed the chain when I broke it trying to do a trick, sat on the porch with me while I ate ice cream too fast, and got a brain freeze. Nothing about him screamed mystery. So when he passed away last winter, peacefully, in his sleep, at age 84, it was hard, but it wasn't a surprise. His health had been declining. The house had gotten quieter. The garden had been left unplanted last spring. We gathered for the funeral, told stories, cried a little, laughed a lot. He would have wanted that. It wasn't until a few weeks later, while helping my dad and uncle clean out his garage, that we found the journal. It was tucked behind a row of mason jars, filled with tiny gears and springs, leather-bound, the corners frayed. My dad opened it first, thinking it might be an old tool log or shopping list. Instead, we found neat looping handwriting. The first entry was dated April 1999. I wasn't even born yet. It read, "Found a toy truck today. Busted axle, cracked cab, left on the curb with the trash. Took it home, fixed it up, painted it red. Left it on the porch at 14 Maple Street. Figured the little one there would be happier seeing it waiting by the door than seeing it thrown away." We kept reading. Entry after entry, spanning over 20 years. Stuffed bear, missing eye and a torn leg, repaired with old corduroy from one of my shirts. Cleaned gently, left it on the swing at 22 Elm. Tricycle, rusty chain, spent all weekend fixing the pedal gears, left it leaning on their front fence before sunrise. He had never told anyone. Not Grandma, not Dad, not us grandkids, no photos, no credit, just quiet entries in a dusty journal. Most of the toys had been found in the trash or left out in the rain. Some were obviously broken. Some had just been outgrown. But Grandpa had seen value in all of them. He didn't knock. He didn't leave notes. He just restored them, left them where they'd be found, and moved on. And the wildest part, some of them were mine. I remembered a plastic dinosaur that had suddenly reappeared on our porch when I was 5, after I thought I'd lost it forever at the park. My parents told me someone must have found it and brought it back. I believed them. But I also remembered the leg had been glued perfectly back on. At the time, I figured it was just magic. It was Grandpa. We started cross-referencing addresses and names mentioned in the journal. Over time, my dad and I realized that half the kids in our neighborhood, now grown, had unknowingly been recipients of Grandpa's secret toy repair missions. So we did something kind of impulsive. We made copies of some journal entries, scanned in a few photos of the toys he described, some of which were still tucked away in his attic, and then we printed simple notes on soft parchment-style paper. Did you ever find a toy left mysteriously on your porch as a child? It might have been my grandfather. His name was James. He never told anyone. But We thought you should know. Then we walked door to door and left them in mailboxes. And the responses. They poured in. One woman came by with a tiny yellow race car she'd kept in her jewelry box since childhood. Another neighbor, now a father himself, showed us a stuffed rabbit that still had one mismatched button eye and a patch sewn on the belly. Stories, tears, hugs. One by one, people shared how those toys had brightened their childhoods. Some had assumed it was their parents. Others thought it was a magic neighbor or a friendly ghost. I guess they weren't entirely wrong. We decided to turn the garage into something more permanent. With donations from the community and a little help from a local carpenter, we built James's Shed, a free toy repair station for kids and parents in the neighborhood. There's a little sign out front with Grandpa's handwriting, which we lifted from the journal. Everything can be fixed with a little patience and a lot of care. People bring in broken toys now. Old dolls, bikes with wobbly wheels, remote controls that won't click anymore. We have a couple of volunteers who come every weekend. I go too. I'm not as good with my hands as Grandpa was, but I'm learning. And every so often, when the weather is just right and the air smells a little like rain and wood glue, I swear, I can feel him there, sitting on the old stool in the corner, smiling, flannel sleeves rolled up, watching, helping, fixing. So no, my grandfather didn't change the world. But he changed our little world, quietly, lovingly, piece by piece. And that's enough for me. Story 5. I thought the elderly man next door was just a grump. Then he left a gift that made me cry. When I moved into my little rental house 3 years ago, I wasn't expecting much. It was all I could afford. Old, creaky floors, a backyard that was more weeds than grass, and a water heater with a personality. But it was mine. After years of living in crowded apartments and with roommates who never did the dishes, I was finally on my own. Next door, in a slightly better kept house with dark green shutters, lived an elderly man named Mr. Feldman. I learned his name only because it was on the mailbox in carefully painted white letters. We never really spoke. He had this aura, perpetually stiff, upright posture, a scowl like he was judging the entire planet, and a habit of standing on his porch in a bathrobe at 6 a.m. with a mug of coffee and a stare that could frost glass. My first week there, I waved to him, just a polite, neighborly thing. He looked straight at me and then didn't wave back, just turned and went inside. All right then, I thought. Message received. I started referring to him, only in my head, as the grump. I knew it wasn't kind, but he seemed like the classic get-off-my-lawn guy. Curtains always drawn, lawn meticulously trimmed, no music, no visitors, no sign of joy, just silence. Over time, I stopped trying. We existed side by side like two characters in parallel stories. But then, things started to shift. It began with small things I almost didn't notice. I'd leave for work in the morning, and my trash bin, which I'd forgotten to roll out, would already be neatly placed on the curb. A few times, I thought I was just misremembering. But it happened consistently, every Thursday. One rainy afternoon, I came home to find the lid of my outdoor grill latched shut with a little piece of twine. I hadn't secured it, and the wind could have snapped it open. I knew I didn't do it. Then one winter morning, after a surprise frost, I came out to find a light dusting of salt on my front steps. My walkway was icy, but not dangerously so anymore. I never kept salt in the house. It was subtle, quiet, no notes, no hints, just invisible acts of care. I started to suspect Mr. Feldman. One day, on a whim, I left a box of shortbread cookies on his porch with a little note. Thank you for the small things. From your grateful neighbor. The next day, the box was gone. Nothing was said, but the trash bin kept getting rolled out. The frost kept getting salted. We still never spoke. It was like a secret friendship made out of gestures. Then, one summer morning, I noticed something different. Mr. Feldman didn't come out for his usual 6 a.m. coffee. I figured maybe he was sleeping in, but the next day, still no sign. By day 3, I started to worry. I knocked on his door. No answer. I called the non-emergency line for a wellness check. The officers came, used the spare key from the property manager, and gently let themselves in. Mr. Feldman had passed away in his recliner. Peacefully, they said. A book open on his chest. A cup of cold coffee nearby. I felt an unexpected wave of grief. Not the overwhelming kind, but something gentle and sad. Like the feeling you get when you finish a quiet book that you didn't realize meant something to you. A few days later, while people came and went for estate matters, I received a small letter in the mail. It had my name on it, first and last, typed neatly, and no return address. Inside was a folded page and a key. The letter read, "Dear, my name. I never said much, but I noticed you. I saw you move in with tired eyes and a cautious hope. You reminded me of my daughter. She was your age when she bought her first place. She passed away a long time ago. I wasn't very good at talking after that. But I wanted to make sure someone kind had what they needed." You didn't see me wave, but I did, after you'd already turned away. In the shed out back, there's a small wooden chest. I've been working on a few things. Consider it a neighbor's farewell. P.S. Thank you for the cookies. They reminded me of my wife. I sat down on my porch and read that letter again. Twice. Then I went to the shed. I'd never noticed a chest back there before, but after a bit of looking, I found it tucked behind a stack of unused flower pots. It was handmade, sanded smooth, with brass corners and a sturdy lock that clicked open with the key he'd sent. Inside were 3 things. A small toolkit, each piece polished and labeled. A wooden birdhouse, perfectly crafted, painted the same green as his shutters. And a photo of him as a young man, standing next to a girl, his daughter, maybe. And a handwritten message on the back. If you're going to live alone, take care of the little things. I cried, quietly. Not because it was tragic, but because it was kind. He hadn't been a grump. He'd been grieving. And still, in all that sadness, he chose to give. To help, even silently. To wave, even if I didn't see it. Since then, I've hung the birdhouse on the maple tree in the front yard. Birds come by sometimes. It makes me smile. I use the toolkit when I fix things around the house. I even started doing what he used to do, pulling my neighbor's bin out if they forget, leaving salt on the steps after a frost. I guess I'm learning from the best. So if you ever move into a quiet neighborhood and meet someone who doesn't smile right away, maybe give them time. Maybe they're waving when you're not looking. And maybe, just maybe, they're already building a birdhouse for you. Story 6. I started leaving my porch light on every night. I didn't realize someone was depending on it. I started leaving my porch light on the week I got laid off. Wasn't symbolic or anything. I just couldn't sleep. Most nights, I'd sit on my little front step in pajamas and an old hoodie, holding a cup of lukewarm chamomile tea, staring into the soft yellow glow of the bulb above. The light made the darkness feel less lonely, I guess. The neighborhood was quiet, not the creepy kind, just comfortably still. Rows of modest homes, old trees swaying gently above, and the occasional dog bark in the distance. I'd only moved in about 6 months prior, and hadn't met many people yet. Most were older couples or quiet families. It was during one of those tea-steeped late-night porch sits that I noticed her. A little girl, maybe 9 or 10, walking slowly along the sidewalk, arms tucked around a backpack nearly the size of her torso, head down, hood up. I thought it was strange, a child out alone after 10 p.m. I stood up, uncertain. But she didn't look frightened, just tired. She paused near my gate and looked up at the porch light. For just a second, her face was calm, but her eyes were sad in the way only kids who grow up too fast can look. Then she walked on, silent, disappearing into the night. I debated calling out, but I didn't want to scare her or seem like a weirdo, so I just watched. The next day, I figured maybe I'd imagined it. A strange dream after too much unemployment stress. But she came again. Same time, same slow walk, same oversized backpack. Again, she glanced up at my porch light and then kept going. It became a pattern. Not every night, maybe 3 or 4 times a week. Always late, always alone, always glancing up at that same light. I started leaving a thermos of tea on the edge of the porch, just in case. It was gone the next morning. After a few days, I left a small note with it. You're welcome to rest here if you need to. I'll be inside. No questions asked. No response. But the tea kept disappearing. Sometimes I left a banana or a granola bar with it. They disappeared too. One evening, I waited inside but peeked through the curtain. She came up to the porch. Carefully, cautiously. She read the note again, picked up the tea, and sat, just for a moment, on the bottom step. She didn't look around. She just sipped quietly, then got up and left. The routine continued for several weeks. Until one day, she didn't come. Then another night passed, and another. I was starting to worry. Then, 5 days after she'd last been by, someone knocked on my door around 9 p.m. It startled me. I rarely got visitors that late. I opened it cautiously and found her. Not with a backpack this time, just a wrinkled hoodie and a shy smile. She looked up at me and said softly, I wanted to say, thank you. I nodded. Of course. Do you want to come in? She shook her head. No. I just wanted you to know I'm okay now. I stepped onto the porch. I'm glad. I was worried. She hesitated, then said, I used to walk to get away from home. Things were hard. My mom works nights, and my stepdad wasn't nice when he drank. But she believed me now. We left. We're staying with my aunt now. She's got fairy lights all around her porch. It's nice. I didn't know what to say, but she smiled again. The tea helped. The light helped more. I pretended it was a lighthouse. Like, if I got lost in the dark, it meant someone good was close. I felt my throat tighten. You can always come back if you ever need to. She nodded. I know, but I think I won't need to now. And then she hugged me. It was quick. One of those small, light kid hugs that somehow carries the weight of everything they've been through. And then she left. I still leave the porch light on. Not because I'm waiting anymore. Because maybe someone else is walking through the dark, quietly hoping for a lighthouse. And if a little glow can offer even a bit of comfort, I think that's reason enough to keep it lit. Story 7. I took a wrong turn on a road trip and ended up in the town my grandfather grew up in. What I found there changed everything. I hadn't meant to stop there. I was 2 hours into a solo road trip meant to clear my head, job stress, a breakup that had left me quieter than usual, and the slow, dull ache of turning 30 and still feeling like I hadn't figured anything out. I didn't have much of a plan, just a playlist, a cooler of snacks, and a vague destination. A quiet cabin up north I found on a booking site. But about halfway there, I missed a highway turnoff. My GPS rerouted me. then rerouted again, taking me down a smaller road, then another, until I found myself driving past endless fields of dry grass and scattered fences. The sign I passed said, "Welcome to Ashwood Pop, 1204. Something about the name tickled a memory. Ashwood. I slowed down and pulled over by an old general store that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1950s. There was a rusted Coke machine out front, a wooden bench, and a closed sign hanging crookedly in the window. Then I remembered. Ashwood was where my grandfather had grown up. He'd mentioned it once during a Thanksgiving years ago. In one of those rare moments, he got nostalgic between spoonfuls of mashed potatoes. I hadn't thought of it since. He'd passed away when I was a teenager, but I still remembered how his voice changed when he talked about the place, like he was smiling through time. I don't know what made me do it, but I turned off the car and decided to stretch my legs. There wasn't much to see. An old diner with faded red booths, a tiny church with peeling white paint, and a park that had more squirrels than children. I walked slowly, unsure what I was looking for. The town had a kind of quiet that felt more preserved than abandoned, like time had been folded neatly and left on a shelf. At the edge of the park, there was a wooden sign that read, "Ashwood History Garden, dedicated to the families who built this town." Underneath were rows of small plaques, each etched with family names. I scanned them lazily, not expecting much. And then I saw it. In memory of the Harper family, Walter, June, and little Edward. My grandfather's name was Edward Harper. I blinked. I crouched down and ran my fingers over the weather-worn metal. It wasn't just a plaque. It was a memory, anchored in place. I took a photo and stood up, unsure of what to feel. Then an older man nearby, who had been raking leaves by the garden fence, called out, "You a Harper?" I looked at him surprised. Yes, kind of. Edward was my grandfather." The man leaned on his rake and smiled like he'd just seen a ghost he was happy to meet. "I remember Eddie," he said. "He was a wild one. Used to race his bike down Main Street like he was chasing the wind." I chuckled. "That sounds about right." He walked over and extended a hand. "Name's Henry. I run the church down the road. Your grandfather and I were in the same grade. He moved away when we were 13, but I never forgot him. He was the kind of kid who made an impression." We ended up talking for an hour. He told me stories I'd never heard, about how my great-grandmother June baked cinnamon rolls every Sunday for the whole block, about how my great-grandfather built the birdhouses that still stood on the edge of town, about how Eddie, my grandfather, once rescued a neighbor's dog from a frozen pond and never told anyone, just left it on their porch, wrapped in his coat. I never knew any of that. When I eventually told Henry I should be going, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a yellowed envelope. "I've been holding on to this," he said, "for years. I found it in the church basement behind an old hymn book. It's addressed to whoever remembers me. Never figured out who it was meant for. Maybe it's you." I took the envelope carefully. The handwriting was unmistakably my grandfather's. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It read, "If you're reading this, I guess you found your way here. I don't know if you're family or just someone curious, but if you're standing in Ashwood, I hope you feel it, the quiet, the kindness, the way the wind moves here. I miss it sometimes." We didn't have much growing up, but we had time. And neighbors. And mornings that smelled like coffee and sawdust. If you're from me or of me, I hope you find those things, wherever you are. Thank you for remembering. I read it 3 times. By the end, my eyes were wet. Not the sobbing kind, just a slow, grateful ache that comes from feeling seen by someone who isn't here anymore. I never made it to the cabin. Instead, I found a small bed and breakfast in Ashwood and stayed the night. The room was cozy. The host made me blueberry pancakes in the morning. I walked around town again, slower this time, and bought an old postcard from a dusty rack in the diner. When I finally drove home the next day, I felt lighter, like I hadn't just taken a detour, but been gently guided to something I didn't know I needed. Now, whenever I feel lost again, when life feels too loud or directionless, I think about that porch in Ashwood, the cinnamon roll sundaes, and a boy named Eddie chasing the wind on his bike. I took a wrong turn. And somehow, it led me exactly where I needed to be. Story 8. I found an old diary in the attic and discovered a stranger's secret. It changed how I see life. Last summer, I was helping my parents clean out the attic of the house I grew up in. They decided it was time to downsize after my dad retired, and I wanted to help because it felt like saying goodbye to an old friend. The attic was this dusty, forgotten world, boxes piled high, broken lamps, faded photographs, and stacks of old books. As I rummaged through a corner, a small leather-bound diary caught my eye. It was old, worn around the edges, with a brass clasp that had rusted shut over time. I asked my parents if it belonged to anyone, but neither of them recognized it. They hadn't lived in the house when the previous family was there, and the diary didn't have a name on the cover. Curious, I gently pried it open. The pages inside were filled with neat handwriting, dated back to the 1940s. It belonged to a young woman named Clara. Her words painted vivid pictures of everyday life during a time I'd only read about in history books. She wrote about the war looming overseas, the sound of airplanes flying far above, and the way the small town where she lived tried to hold on to normalcy. But what touched me most wasn't the history. It was her heart. Clara wrote about her dreams to become a teacher, her shy crush on a boy named James, and the kindness she found in unexpected places. One entry stood out. Today, a stranger came to the market. He looked tired and hungry. No one seemed to notice him, but I gave him my last loaf of bread. He smiled so warmly, and for a moment it felt like the whole world was a little less heavy. As I read, I realized Clara was someone who saw the world not just as it was, but as it could be, full of small acts of kindness that could ripple out and change everything. I kept turning pages, following her story through letters of hope, moments of sadness, and quiet victories. Near the end, I found a folded photograph tucked between pages. A picture of Clara standing beside a man who must have been James, both smiling shyly at the camera. And on the back of the photo was a note. To whoever finds this diary, thank you for caring enough to read my story. Life is fragile, but love and kindness are stronger than time. Remember to be gentle with yourself and others. I closed the diary slowly, feeling a deep sense of connection to someone I'd never met. For days after, I thought about Clara's words. How easy it is to get caught up in the noise of today's world and forget the power of a simple smile, a helping hand, or sharing your last piece of bread. I started carrying a few extra granola bars in my bag. When I saw people waiting at bus stops or walking alone on cold days, I'd offer them a snack or a warm smile. Sometimes they'd accept. Sometimes they'd just nod. But I could see in their eyes that little spark of hope, just like Clara saw in that stranger long ago. This summer, I donated that diary to the local library so others could read it too. I hope Clara's story reminds people, like it reminded me, that even when the world feels heavy, kindness is a quiet light that never goes out. Story 9. I help elderly neighbor every week for a year. What she told me changed my whole perspective on life. Last year, during a time when the world felt overwhelmingly chaotic, I started noticing my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, struggling more and more. She lives just 2 houses down, an 82-year-old widow who's been a fixture in our neighborhood for decades. I'd often see her tending her garden with the help of a walker, or sitting on her porch, watching the street quietly. One autumn afternoon, as the leaves were turning gold, I noticed she was having trouble carrying her groceries inside. Her hands trembled, and the bag seemed heavy. Without thinking twice, I offered to help. She smiled warmly and accepted, her eyes twinkling despite the struggle. That small moment turned into a weekly routine. Every Saturday morning, I'd stop by to help her with errands, fix small things around the house, or just sit and listen while she told stories about her youth. Stories about the town, the friends she'd lost, and the garden she'd tended with her late husband. One afternoon, after we put away the groceries, she pulled out a photo album. The pages were yellowed, and the corners curled, but the memories inside were alive. She showed me pictures of her and her husband, their wedding day, their first home, and their 2 children, now grown and living far away. As she spoke softly, I realized how much history and love filled this small house. One day, as we sat sipping tea on our porch swing, she shared something that stuck with me. Life, she said, isn't about how fast you move or how much you accomplish. It's about these moments. Quiet, simple, and shared. I nodded, feeling the truth settle in my chest like a warm blanket. She told me about the day her husband passed, how the house felt empty afterward, and how she almost gave up on tending the garden they planted together. But then, she said, a young man started helping me carry my groceries every week. That kindness reminded me that I wasn't alone, that even when things get hard, there are people who care. I smiled awkwardly, realizing she was talking about me. We spent the rest of that afternoon watching the sun set behind the trees, the sky painted in soft oranges and pinks. That year, helping Mrs. Thompson became one of the most grounding parts of my life. It taught me patience, gratitude, and the quiet power of connection. Sometimes, it's easy to forget how much a small gesture, a helping hand, a shared story can mean to someone who feels forgotten. I hope, whenever you feel overwhelmed or isolated, you remember Mrs. Thompson's words. Life is about those quiet, simple moments. And sometimes, all it takes is a little kindness to make the world feel a little less heavy. Story 10. I lost my way on a hiking trail. But a stranger's simple act made me feel safe again. It was a cool autumn morning when I decided to go for a solo hike in the nearby national park. I needed to clear my head. Life had been overwhelming lately, and being surrounded by nature always helped me find some peace. I packed a small backpack, water, snacks, a map, and a jacket. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft golden glow through the trees. The air smelled like pine and damp earth. At first, the trail was easy to follow. The path wound gently through the forest with leaves crunching softly under my boots. Birds chirped distant melodies, and a gentle breeze rustled the branches. But after about an hour, I took a wrong turn. I didn't realize it at first. The trail became narrower, less marked. The trees grew thicker, and the sounds of other hikers faded away. When I finally stopped and looked at my map, my heart sank. I was lost. I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. I retraced my steps a bit, but the forest seemed to twist and turn like a maze. The sun was climbing higher now, but I could tell I wasn't near the main path. I sat down on a fallen log and pulled out my phone. No signal. Panic started to creep in, but I pushed it aside. I reminded myself to stay calm, conserve my water, and think. Just as I was gathering my strength to move again, I heard footsteps. Out of the woods stepped a man, maybe in his 60s, with a kind smile and a walking stick. "Lost, are we?" he said softly. I nodded, feeling both relief and embarrassment. He introduced himself as Carl, a retired park ranger who often walked these trails to stay connected to nature. Without hesitation, he offered to help me find the way back. As we walked, he shared stories about the park, how the trees grew over centuries, how animals adapted, and how the forest always found ways to heal itself. His calm voice, steady presence, and knowledge made the forest feel less like a maze and more like a friend. Along the way, he gave me a bottle of water and some trail mix he carried. We talked about life, the things that stress us out, the moments that bring joy, and how sometimes getting lost isn't so bad if you have someone to walk with. After about an hour, we finally saw the familiar markers of the main trail. I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. Before parting ways, Carl said, "Remember, sometimes it's okay to ask for help, and sometimes the forest teaches us more when we lose our way." I thanked him deeply. That day, I learned that even when life feels confusing and uncertain, kindness from a stranger can be a light in the darkness. And that sometimes being lost is just the first step toward finding your way. If you're still here, I hope these stories helped you drift closer to rest. Let me know which one stood out to you the most. I always love reading your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to Reddit's for Sleep so you never miss a night of calm stories. Sleep well, and I'll see you tomorrow.